Hi, everyone. As promised, we are back for our final event of day 3, an evening with John Warner Smith. And I realized as I was thinking about today that I have talked a lot about One Book, One New Orleans. I've mentioned it a few times. I don't think I've actually told you all today what it is that One Book, One New Orleans does. What we do is we pick one book every year, hence the name, and we encourage everyone in the city to read the same book at the same time, with the idea that we'll grow stronger as a community through a shared reading experience. But in doing so, we have to recognize that we have approximately a 27% functional illiteracy rate among our adults, which tends to make folks' lives harder. So if we're going to be One Book, One New Orleans, we have to make that book accessible to those who would normally be excluded from a community of readers. I develop a curriculum around the book, and we get that book into the hands free of charge to adult education programs, HISEP programs, adult ESL programs. We get that book into prisons. We get that book into juvenile detention centers for incarcerated teens. All of these folks are using our book and our curriculum to improve their literacy skills. We also get that book into the ears of the blind and print handicapped through a partnership with WRVH Reading Radio. And of course, our partners at the New Orleans Public Library also get some copies to make sure that if you can read, but you can't afford to buy that book, you can go to your library and get it for free. And then we have a series of community events that bring everyone together. They're always in different neighborhoods. So if you have transportation issues, One Book will probably be in your neighborhood at some point during the year, at least once. We are really hoping during 2021 to get back into the neighborhoods and offline. So look for that. And of course, we could not do this without y'all's generous support. And one of our biggest supporters throughout the year has not only been the Words and Music Festival, because all proceeds from Words and Music go right back into our community to invest in this year-round literacy work, but another one of our big supporters has been the Louisiana Endowment for the Humanities that has generously supported this really important initiative. So here to tell us a little bit more about LEH, who not only support community programs, but also support the Louisiana Poet Laureate, is Erin Greenwald.
Hi, everybody. It's so good to be here. The Louisiana Endowment for the Humanities is a proud supporter of One Book, One New Orleans and the Words and Music Festival. Every 2 years, we also have the honor of participating in the nomination and selection process for the Louisiana Poet Laureate. John Warner Smith, our state's current Poet Laureate, has, I suspect, not had quite the experience he envisioned when Governor John Bel Edwards appointed him to the post in August of 2019. Throughout the difficulties of the last 8 months, however, John has been a constant source of inspiration. And he's been working hard, meeting virtually with community groups large and small across the state to bring his voice, his poetry to the people. His words, always insightful and sometimes painful, are a reflection of our times, a reminder of the depth and diversity of the human experience. The Louisiana Endowment for the Humanities, with funding made possible by the National Endowment for the Humanities, is thankful for the opportunity to support programs like this one. Thanks, Megan.
Thank you. And now, without further ado, I'm going to introduce the man of the hour, John Warner Smith, the current State Poet Laureate of Louisiana. He's published 4 collections of poetry, most recently Muhammad's Mountain by local New Orleans publisher Lavender Ink in 2018. His 5th collection, Our Shut Eyes, will be released this year. He has earned his MFA from the University of New Orleans, which is right down the street from where I'm sitting right now, and he's a Cave Canem Fellow. He's the 2020 recipient of a fellowship awarded by the Academy of American Poets and the winner of a 2019 Linda Hodge Bromberg Poetry Award. He's coming to us this evening from Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Welcome, John.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm so very excited about being here today.
All right, I believe you're going to read a few and then we'll bring in your interviewer for the evening.
Yes, okay. How many do you think I should begin with? Just 2 or 3, maybe? Um, and I'm surrounded by books. So I'll tell you what I'll do. My most recent collection is going to be released by the end of this year, being published by MadHat Press, who published Soul Be a Witness, my second collection. And I have a special group of poems. Many of the poems, in fact, of this book are poems written to commemorate the 40th anniversary, if you can call it that, of the Atlanta child murders that took place from 1979 to roughly 1981, many years ago, 40 plus years ago. And so I decided to write a number of poems about that experience. So I'm going to read two poems from that from that section of my upcoming collection. This first one is titled Darren Glass. Now, Darren is one of the victims of the Atlanta child murders. There were roughly 30, in some sources the count is 28, but 28 to 30 victims, young Black children, mostly boys and poor, who were killed, murdered during this time period. And Darren was a foster child, and he is the only victim of the Atlanta child murders whose body was never found. He speaks now. I am one of the innocents slaughtered by a world that never heard stories we told and songs we sang. I know the rage of night, but you needn't worry or wonder. I am safe and strong, not a Black boy shattered by the weight of hate, the one who became a vapor in the twilight of day. I am sounds stirring cool spring air, the ones you can never name. I am a mist of blinding fog, faces of clouds, and the whir of birds soaring. I'm not a memory or phantom. I'm not flesh, bone, or dust. I am invisible, but real, like a bud in the garden of your children's dreams. I don't remember my mother and father, how I became glass, but I know that I am Darren, broken, yet whole. The second poem is Chattahoochee. Chattahoochee is the name of a river where you might say the first body of the victims were found that led to the arrest of Wayne Williams, who has been in prison for 40 years for only two of these murders. The rest have gone unsolved. And so, Chattahoochee, I am your last song, the Hoochie, a river of painted rocks. Was there nothing left to drink when you walked the wilderness, camouflaged, longing for fresh red water? Splash, splash, splash. Surely now, in your silent, solitary nights, you hear the echo and refrain. Splash, splash, splash. Startling, yet familiar as bath, or the breathless weight of glass dropped to stone. You, me, and our sweet demon, a cappella in the moonless night, renowned but undiscovered, until finally, like dongs soaring from a bell tower, heard. Okay, that's, I'll begin with those two from Our Shut Eyes, and we can certainly come back to some more readings, but I wanted to certainly give the listeners just a little bit of taste of those poems dedicated to the Atlanta child murders. Okay, I'm seeing a pause here, so I think I'm waiting on someone to bring Chris on. Christopher? Okay. I was going to just jump in, Christopher, and read another of that collection.
Please do. Yeah,
okay.
Please.
Let me read one of my favorite, and again, this is coming out of out of Our Shut Eyes, and the title of this poem is "What Schools Don't Teach Black Boys in America Today." After Langston Hughes and Sterling Brown, two of my favorite poets of the Renaissance period. What schools don't teach Black boys in America today? I've known Rivers long enough to know not enough Black boys take their marks at the start line, perch on a high wire overlooking the world, their eyes spread, their wings spread wide, ready to soar toward the sun. Not enough take the stage except to sing, dance, rap rhymes, or mime to songs wearing white painted faces. Maybe they'd rather watch and listen than read Douglas, Baldwin, and King, or cruise, chill, shoot hoops, and wander a mall than stand unpainted, reciting Langston, Terence Danez, and Jericho. It shouldn't matter that white boys, whom the world expects to win, can wear the black mask. Portier, Denzel, Idris style, like auditioning for a Broadway show. Morningbird voice, thick-lipped, bulging tight pants and all, with a little James Brown swagger, stepping toward the stage. Maybe too many Black boys in America today know too much of shallow streams and dry desert sands. Don't hear the bell, their silence rings of untold pain that keeps a boy inside a man. And don't hear words of strong Black men who've known ancient, dusky rivers, men who curse love for not loving back, who stumble, fall, or get knocked down, but get up, speak truth out loud, and make a way out of no way with nothing but a tom-tom, crying, laughing, and singing in their hearts. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. Langston Hughes is probably my favorite poet ever, and I love to see folks riffing off of his work. It gives me chills. That poem, I got chills in the best way. And another poet who gives me chills on the regular is Christopher Louis Romaguera, who writes about being a Cuban American and feeling like he's away from a home he didn't really know in Cuba. So welcome to Chris, who's not only a phenomenal poet, but is also a monthly blogger at Plowshares Magazine. And like Mr. Smith, has a degree from the University of New Orleans, an MFA. So to UNO grads, welcome. I can't wait to hear this conversation.
What a combination. What a combination.
Yeah, go Privateers, right?
There you go. There you go.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that reading. All three of those poems were beautiful. And,
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, that was a good technical difficulties because I got an extra one.
Oh, that's okay.
No, actually, this worked out really well, in particular with how your pieces kind of. So in one of the pieces we were talking about earlier this week was hands, right? And I noticed that in the first line of hands, you have, no one might ever say what I'm about to tell you. And I was thinking about what bearing witness means for a poet, and especially if the three pieces you just wrote and the collection in general that's about to come out. I was wondering what bearing witness means when you're writing poetry. What do you try to convey when you're writing poetry and storytelling wise?
Yeah, well, much of it, Christopher, is grounded in history, intertwined with my personal history. And I'm, you might say, an older man who has passed through much fire in many deep waters of the Jim Crow era. I did that, of course, at a much younger age, but my parents and my grandparents and great-grandparents, suffered greatly through that era. And so it's so easy for me, to connect my personal history to their personal history, to the collective history of Black Americans in America, and that's how much of it, so much of my poetry, I think, sort of flows out of that space. History is, I think, very much biography. When you think about it, because we all live it, and it kind of depends on what perspective you take. So hands, was one of those types of poems where I remember writing that poem at a retreat at Cave Canem. And at Cave Canem, you have to write a poem like every day, and have it in the bin, as they say, by 10 o'clock the next morning. I was up all night, working on this poem, and I workshopped it the following morning, but I got some great feedback from the workshop participants. It started out really just reflecting on my grandfather, my grandfather Andre, who Andrew, some would call him, the non-Creole version of him, who raised me, and he spent time in prison for as a young man himself, for manslaughter. And then it kind of shifted from that experience of him and how, how that happened, how the killing happened, and, his experience at Angola State Penitentiary. And then I thought about part two, what came part two, my own encounters as a young man, 18, 19, 20, early 20s with the police and law enforcement. Not that I was committing crimes, but there was this one moment in which I could have. And that became part two. And then it made me think, that, well, if I could have committed that crime, just a split second, just a thought that had entered my head, but something pulled me back. I don't know what it was, right? Pulled me back. If I would have committed that crime, John Warner Smith, that's speaking with you tonight, would not exist. I'd have either been shot, killed, or been in prison for the rest of my life. So the real, it's just it just made me think about how so many. I think the lives of so many young Black men are in that way. Not that they have any intent to do wrong things or bad things, but it all begins with just this crazy thought of feeling that overtakes them in just that split second, and their whole lives, are down the drain. There was something bigger that prevented me from going down that road. But so I connected, Grandfather Andre to me in that way, and that's what hands is. Hands, his hands, killed a man. My hands came a split second from pushing a door against a state trooper's leg, while my cousin of mine would have reached for his gun, and we'd have my hands, right? So that's kind of how these things evolve, and you have to really just kind of work on them to condense two stories so big into such a small space in a way that will help the reader to to feel and to think in a different way, to think differently about life, perhaps, either their lives or others. So I think that's a short answer to to your question.
No, and I think it's so beautiful to read, because like the idea of focusing in on this common denominator of just the anatomy of the physical hands as well as circumstance, but how one, for lack of a better phrase, goes left, one goes right. And the story of your grandfather, whether it was the story, the knowledge, or some sort of like spiritual push moving you in the right direction, or not, but like moving in a direction that's more.
The line that I think for me personally is for me personally is the strongest lines in the poem is these lines, and again, remember you read the poem, I'm speaking to my grandsons. I have 8 grandsons, and so I think I know a little bit about boys, a little bit. I got one son, but 8 grandsons. So this is a poem in which I'm speaking to them and trying to impart what little wisdom I have or lessons that I've learned in my years on this earth. And so I say, so when I say that any goodness in you and me is penance. I mean that the life we think is ours is not. Strong men cry us into existence, and prayers of good women are answered. And I especially like the prayers of good women. Because, you know, I don't know, somebody was praying for me that night, and have been praying for me for the rest of my life, and then so help, all of which I think have kind of helped to sustain me through the troubled waters that I have, you know, I have moved through in the course of my lifetime.
Yeah, I mean, strong men cry is so important, but there's nothing stronger than prayers of good women. So
No, absolutely not.
No, yeah, and I love that idea of like passing on legacy, because you're going through so many generations, right? Because it's your grandfather, but then you are also telling the story in the poem to your grandchildren. And I was curious, like, how that passing on of storytelling, how does that affect your poetry? Is that like constantly in the forefront?
You know, yeah, you know, Christopher, my grandfather, who I just spoke about, was illiterate. You know, he never learned to read or to write. Never attended a school in his life, but he's a great storyteller. This guy could just, you know, mesmerize you with his stories. And what I remember most about him were those stories, you know, in his later years, when I was, I guess, in my college years, you know, I had a lot of other things on my mind, you know, and I'd go visit him, but he would pull me into these stories, you know, and I would kind of drift in and out of them, but because they, you know, but he would tap me on my elbow, like, you know, as if to tell me, "Hey, come back. I know you're not here right now," you know. But I think that if I have any gift of creative expression, any gift of storytelling in poetry, I think it's because of him. I think that he has passed that part of himself on to me without having, you know, to know much about the English language. In fact, he was Creole, you know, and he spoke what we would call Creole. You know, his neighbors, when I was a young boy, he was raising me, would call him Mr. Frenchy, you know, because he spoke more French than English. And I know very little French, but I honestly think that that I sort of inherited that from him. And again, it's for me what makes my poetry so special, and the Poet Laureate office so special for me, is knowing that I'm here because a man who never learned to read or write took time to tell me stories. And sort of, even when I was not interested or wanted to go and hang out with the boys, you know, still wanted to kind of visit and spend some time with them still. I think it kind of managed to sink in, and so I owe so much of whatever I've been able to do with poetry to him. You know.
No, and that's so interesting, because I feel like I also came to stories in a similar way, you know, stories at the dinner table with my parents and mis abuelos about a place I'd never seen, Cuba, that was home to all of them. And growing up in Miami, all my friends in between basketball games sitting on a green power box, and they're all telling stories from their homes. I'd never been to Colombia, Dominican Republic. And it's actually a good segue to one of the questions I was going to ask you, of like, what you have such a rhythm when you read, and you could catch it when you read the work, but even more so, obviously, when you're reading the poetry yourself. How do you go about like capturing that rhythm?
Oh, yeah. It's someone asked me that question recently. I think it was when I was doing Festival of Words conference a couple of weeks ago, and um, sound I think is an important element of poetry. And when I'm writing, I'm in a quiet space, and I'm all alone, and I do a lot of just handwriting, just and then if I shift to a computer, it's in the revision process perhaps. But there's always a point in time in which I've got to hear the poem, and I've got to hear what I think, and I want to hear what I want the reader or the listener to hear. And if I'm in that, I think a big part of the revision process, and I don't know, you're a writer, you kind of like this. I probably overwork a poem, I overwork a poem, but I have to read it, begin to read it out loud, and to hear. It's almost kind of intuitive, but to hear what I want the reader to hear, and until I hear that, I'm not done with the poem, right? And so I'm back to words. I'm just revising and revising until I get to that point in which I feel like the sound is there. I mean, the imagery is, you've got to work on that. You've got to choose the words, that are going to show some pictures, sometimes it's pictures that you have to work through to really kind of hold the reader's interest. So all those are also important, and syntax. You've got to the technical aspects of it. You kind of have to work. But personally, for me, I think that sound is one of the most important elements. And I'm not a performance poet. Man, you couldn't pay me enough money to do that. I don't know how slam poets, performance poets do it. They blow me away. I love to hear them perform. So, but I try to in my personal reading of a poem, slow the poem down enough so that the sound of the poem, the beat of the poem, the music of the poem is felt and heard.
Well, I mean, I'm not going to call you what you said you're not, but you read that beautifully. So,
I've memorized a couple of really short poems, But the other thing for me is I have a tendency to write some real long poems, right? And I don't know how that happens. I remember I was in a workshop. I think it was one of the Callaloo creative writing workshops with Tracy K. Smith, and I told her when I turned the poem in, I said, "No, it was my turn to read my poem." I said, "I'm sorry about the length of this poem," and she looked at me. She says, "No, you're not." It's like that's what you do, So I flow with that. I said, "Okay." I was feeling like, these long poems, and long poems can be challenging because so much can go wrong in a long poem. But at the same time, it requires so much energy and so much work, and to hold that beat, and to just kind of keep the reader grounded and interested. So, yeah.
Yeah.
it's work, you know.
As someone who writes long, I hope it is so much work and such a journey, but I hope that makes it that much more rewarding when you get back home, you know.
Yeah. You know, well, you know, when you get a long poem published, because you know, not many journals are interested. I mean, they, you know, many of them don't have the space for that, you know, and for these real long poems. And I'm always surprised when, you know, when one gets accepted, you know, it makes up for all the rejections, you know, even the short poems that I've gotten. You know, one long, it's about as good as you can get, you know, if a journal takes it. Yeah.
A little earlier, you had mentioned the poet laureate's office. How I know it's 2020, but how does it feel like?
Yeah.
This,
Well, man,
distinction?
well, you know, it's Aaron was on earlier, you know, and I with the Louisiana Endowment for the Humanities. And I got that call from her. I didn't see. I saw a New Orleans 504 number, and I usually don't take calls that I'm not familiar with, unknown calls. And I took that one, and she gave me the news. I just like, wow, man, I was on another cloud. You know, it was just crying and, you know, happy all at the same time. And because I felt that that they were, I didn't know who the other nominees, you know, were, but I felt that there were so many other more deserving awards. Although I wanted the appointment, you know, I really, in my heart, felt that, well, maybe not this time, maybe next time, you know, but I'll at least plant the seed there. And so when I got it on the first nomination, that was important for me. And so I don't know how many readings, sort of appearances I made as a poet laureate before the pandemic, but I was on a pretty, I think, fast track up to that point. I mean, if one person or two, you know, said, "Hey, can you come to our, you know, room and read somewhere?" And I said, "Yeah, I'd love to." Right? Um, you know, send your application into the LEH, and I'll show up. Right? And I did some small ones and some, you know, some that had, you know, nice little audiences, but I was willing to go anywhere to read, you know, for anybody. And I did a lot of them. And my schedule for this year was already, I think, probably uh, pretty busy through. I want to say through May. At the time, you know, the pandemic things started shutting down, you know, like late March, early April. But I was going to be doing a lot of stuff in April, in May, and was even looking beyond. So, but I've continued to do a lot of, you know, virtual stuff. I'll do, you know, any virtual reading that in which I'm asked to, and you know, I can tell you what has been the most gratifying experience for me, Christopher, and that has been being in places, meeting people, um, you know, going places, just being in rooms where I never would have been before without the Poet Laureate office, and it's been, and even virtually, you know, you're not in that room, you're not in that, you know, you're not physically, you know, touching people, looking them, you know, in the eye physically, but even that has has been inspiring and uplifting. But I've often said that I get more out of this than I give, and um, and which is why I would never say no to anyone who would ask me as poet laureate to come out and perform, because I knew that I was going to get it was going to be a treat for me. You know, I was God willing, if I could get there and the schedule work out, I was going to get something for me, uh, as much as I was going to give. But that has been, I think, the real, um, for me personally, you know, the real treat of this. I remember last last year about this time. In fact, it might have been this very same a weekend, or maybe early November. I went to New Iberia, Louisiana, and I was asked to write a poem, a commemorative poem, a poem commemorating the 75th anniversary of the expulsion of, you know, many of the Black leaders, not many, but a handful of Black leaders of that community. A literal expulsion, you know, and I, I I I spent a lot of time on that poem. Really worked hard on it. But going to that event, meeting all of the, I mean, meeting people whom I had never seen or met before in my life, and talking to them about that experience. I met, you know, many of the family members of these Black people who had professionals, doctors, educators, who had been literally run out of Iberia Parish in 1944 because they were advocating training for Black people, training, education, and so it was just one of those experiences that, had I not been, I guess, poet laureate, they wouldn't have invited me to write a poem. And writing and reading the poem, you know, I mean, that was a real treat. But what they don't know is that they gave me much more than I put into that poem or that reading. So it's been, and I could say, I mean, that's just one example. I mean, I can point to really every appearance that I've made personally, and can, you know, talk about the uniqueness of that time and place, and the people I met there, and how much I really got out of it as a writer. So, but I'm looking forward to. I've still got a few months left. There's going to be some virtual stuff, and who knows, you know, we get a vaccine kicking in, you know, might be able to begin face to face sometime before August of next year, when my term expires. So we'll see.
That's a beautiful thing. Not only like the opportunity to connect with different audiences, and also you being so amenable to connecting with everybody who asked you to read, but also be able to like produce something from it, like the Commemoration in the New Iberia poem. Yeah, that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, and you know, it's that poem, in fact, it ended up being one of the last poems that I've included in my upcoming collection. So it's always, you know, when you're asked to compose, a good thing. But in the learning experience too, because I had no idea that it happened in 1944. I was certainly aware of, you know, much of the the problems that Louisiana, like the rest of the country, was experiencing, racial problems in Jim Crow, and how Black people were being denied civil rights in those years, and so I learned a great deal in the process of being a part of that. And out of, again, had I not been poet laureate, I just I never would have known, Yeah.
But see, that's a beautiful thing of like being able to like actually have something tangible to like latch onto that this experience is giving you. No, I'm thinking now like so many of your pieces. I mean, Muhammad's Mountain, obviously, an homage to Ali. Your forthcoming, very much encapsulates a historical moment in Atlanta. With that, like recurring motif in your work, is there something like, is there a particular way that you try to encapsulate these historical moments, these scenes?
Well, yeah, there is. I mean, in the case of my first collection, there were I don't know how many poems are in there, but because it's about the title, A Mandala of Hands, and that line was actually taken from a poem, I think the title of which is a vigil about my mother, but the and the time when she was nearing her death, but many poems of it's a good many of them, at least, of A Mandala of Hands deal with those historical moments. Soul Be a Witness, was more of, I guess, well, the subtitle says it all, songs to and for, black boys. And so a little less, I think, of the historical moments there, but and more of just poetry speaking to the challenges that Black boys and Black men experience, not just in contemporary times, but have always experienced being in America. And then I had an opportunity to write a collection of poems in collaboration with an artist, very accomplished, creative guy, Dennis Paul Williams, visual artist in St. Martinville. And so Spirits of the Gods came along, as another project. And it was just something Dennis and I had talked about doing for some time, was writing, doing this collaboration of my poetry and his art, right? And so we decided to just go down that road and see where it leads, and fortunately, UL Press published it for us. And so, and there's all kinds of, well, the title is Spirits of the Gods, so there, I wasn't so much thinking more consciously about history, really about anything, but pushing the unconscious more. And those forces, those demons, those gods that cause us, and not just us personally, but humans, to do the things that they do. So Dennis would text me 4 or 5 of these paintings of his, and then I would just I would meditate, I'd pray, I'd have a few drinks, or whatever, I'd carry them around everywhere I'd go. I'd even I have a poem slipped into my Bible, you know, at church. I have a painting, you know, and just I would. Dennis didn't title these poems. I didn't know what. I was just looking at an image, you know, Christopher, and then a poem would be born out of that process. And he didn't ask to read the poems before they went to in the final. He saw the final manuscript, but he didn't want to have any input. And I certainly couldn't have any input in his art, you know. But so that and so there are, you know, sort of in that book, you know, there's a little bit of everything there. Much of my I guess you might say, of who I am as a person, the way I think, the way I feel, the way I look at the world, I think is sort of comes out of, you know, those phases of my life in which I was doing different things, reading different things in my college years and in the years following those years at McNeese State. I was a psychology major, believe it or not, you know. And then I picked up an English minor. That's how I discovered my love for literature. But as a psych student, you know, I read a lot of Carl Jung, who's an analytical psychologist, clinical, but psychiatrist, however you want to call it. But he was you know, a Swiss psychologist who, you know, gave us just this all these theories on depth psychology, and it's like I was walking around analyzing me and the whole world for many years. You know? So, but and I won't go into all the, you know, principles and concepts, but bottom line is this: is that I think in creating poems for spirits of the gods, I was very much pushing pushing symbolism and, you know, those things that are intangible, that we don't necessarily see, feel, hear, things that we don't think are causing us to do the things that we do. And so many of the poems are there now. And then I don't know how I shifted to Muhammad's Mountain from from Spirits of the Gods. I mean, I went from that, from writing 32 poems that many of which are kind of really grounded in what I would call the underworld, you know, the world of dreams and symbols and myths, to writing a book that pays homage to Muhammad Ali. And I can tell you how the book was born. I had written one poem. In fact, I had written one poem in Spirits of the Gods, and it's titled Ali, right? And this was in June of 2016. This is when the project had started, you know, I don't know, maybe that spring. But so that summer, I wrote a number of poems, and I was very much, I guess, sort of pulled into moments of things just happening, right? And there was an image that, I don't know if the audience can see it. Well, let me see, that's the wrong one. That Dennis sent me, and page 79. And I remember looking at that image thinking, well, I don't know if you could see it, but there's every poem in the book, there's a beautiful piece of art on the opposite page, right? And I remember looking at this image, and I've been carrying this around for maybe a couple of weeks, trying to find a poem. And then Ali died. in early June 2016, and I that weekend was painful for me. I was that weekend watching the news, and all the I guess the tributes being paid to the greatest. And I went back to the photograph of the painting, and I said, I've got to write this, right? So in the middle of, it was pouring down raining that day. I think it was Saturday, and I had the painting in front of me, and the television was on. And so I just picked up the pencil and started writing. And so it reads, Ali, rain pouring all day, tributes, photo shots, film footage. He floats, he jabs, he whoops ass. He mouths off. He rhymes, he defies, he lights a torch. The greatest is dead. I can't stop the rain. Can't stop remembering a boy, dreaming, shadowboxing, shuffling feet, me pretending to be Ali. So, that I had no idea, even in writing that little poem, that I'd end up writing a whole entire collection. But I was sitting around one day, and this crazy thought into my head was, there has to be, I wonder if there's like a collection of poetry on Ali. There must be a lot of stuff out there, right? So I said, well, maybe I can do maybe an anthology or something, pull together all the books and poetry. Well, what I found on Ali was that there was none. I found, my only source was the internet, and I found maybe about a handful of poems out there that had been published. And this was this was a year later. This was a year later after that poem was born. I said, okay. And I hadn't, I had some idea of what my next collection would be, but it had nothing to do with Muhammad Ali. So I pushed all of that aside, and I said, I've got to think about this. I've got what the world needs right now. It's maybe at least one book of poetry on Muhammad Ali. And so I set out to do that. And for months, I just became completely immersed in Ali. And I had this, personal connection with him too. I guess his life as a junior high student, when he was making that stand of defiance against the draft and being inducted in the Army. And I had personally connected to him because I was in ninth grade. I was one of 5 Black students who had started this all-white school, started attending this all-white school. And I was the darkest one. There were only 2 Black boys, and the other was much, much lighter skin than I, much finer hair. I was the little spook. And entering the doors, and I caught hell. I was spat on, cursed, called all kinds of racial names and that sort of thing, and it was a struggle for me. And then when this young Black man stood up and said, I am not going to become part of this war because of my religious faith. I don't care if you take it all away from me, and my crown, my money, my cars, take it all away and put me in prison for 5 years. I'm going to stand up for my belief. And I said, gosh, what courage, huh? And so I connected with him in that way as a young man. So that made the obsession made the obsession much easier, because for months it became just that. I just was totally immersed in books, DVDs, videos, articles where I could find them studying Ali's life, Ali's journey, and so the book was done, and it was really, I think, for me personally, I mean, I think it's one of my best works, although, and a few journals thought so. I mean, I think about half the poems in the book, were eventually published in some journals. So I feel good that I got, if nobody's buying the book, at least they're buying these journals. Right? I got the poems out there. So it was a special thing for me. It was I think it was a project that I'm glad I completed. And then I had this really, I guess you might say, how to describe it. Really, it was a surprising experience, but it was for me one that I'll cherish for the rest of my life, was when I had an opportunity in launching the book to read at the Muhammad Ali Center in Louisville. It just I can't describe that, man. To be standing, in that building. I had attended the night before the big fundraising gala that was done each year at the center, and then the following day, I think the city of Louisville had put together a film on the week after Ali's death and all that had happened, all the tributes, even the funeral itself and all that. So there were 3 showings of that film, and after each showing of the film, I read, right, and that it just and his children, grandchildren were there. I met his wife, Lonnie, the night before, and then a few celebrities showed up, and it's like Martin Luther King III was there, and I got to read Black Power, and with that poem Black Power, and Martin Luther King III sitting in the audience. It's like, gosh, I mean, I was reading the poems of Muhammad Ali in my feet, kind of like the way Ali would float in the ring. My feet were not touching the ground, man. I was on a cloud, right? Yeah. It was. So that was all him, and I also had. I was blessed, really, to have the opportunity to get his daughter Hannah to read the book and give me a blurb. The great poet Nikki Giovanni read the book, the manuscript, and wrote a blurb for the back. Yeah, it's like, things just sort of just coming together. Like I had, I couldn't have dreamt this. I couldn't have thought it consciously, and it would have happened. I was just kind of. I think I was a vessel. Really, I was floating through this thing, and I was just a vessel. It was meant to be, and I'm glad it happened. But I take really I can't take much personal credit for the creative force of the book, because I felt through the entire experience that I was just, being used to get it done, So And if you, I'd love to read. Can I read at least one?
Please do.
No,
Yeah.
no. And this is a pretty, I think, important poem because this October, important in the historic context. This October, last month, marked the 50th anniversary of Ali's return to the ring. Right? You remember he had really been exiled. I mean, he for 3.5 or so years while waiting for the Supreme Court to. Well, he went through all this appeals process, and then his case finally ended up in the U.S. Supreme Court. But during this time, his title was stripped away from him, and he couldn't fight anywhere in the world, nowhere. And he was, kind of just living on borrowed time and doing all kinds of things to make a living, but he could not fight, do what he really loved to do. And so in October of 1950, he got back into the ring, and in Atlanta, Georgia, of all places. So, and then let me say this too, before I read the poem. Coretta Scott King was there that night. Yeah, she was there. Ralph Abernathy was there that night. Had Dr. King not been killed in '68, he'd have been there too. We know that, right? So it was in that kind of context that, I was standing there in the King's in the Ali Center with Martin III sitting there, and then I read Black Power. October 1970, Jackson 5 tops the charts. Ali, 3 years without a fight. Like a buzzard, jail time hovers over his head. Tonight, the ring is his stage again. Black drama on the big screen in badass blaxploitation fashion. Ali coming back. Quarry, the latest great white hope, a hard dream killer. But this is Muhammad Ali after 3 years in exile. This is Atlanta, GA, where black dreams come true. On a night when blackness steps out dressed to kill. Black actors, athletes, singers, pimps, preachers, prostitutes, and politicians, all panache, all here to see the greatest. Cheer him on, hear his mouth, watch him float, duck, and jab. Ringside sideshows decked in mink, fur, diamonds, and pearls. This is nation time. Civil rights. Black power time. And tonight, no one is blacker, prettier, more right and powerful than the champ. Man, that's 50 years ago. Can you believe it? His legacy still lives and will always live. Yes. I don't know what that question was you asked me, but but I just kind of I went down the river, man, on that one. Thank you.
Oh, but I was going with you. I went
down the river on that one. So yeah, it was. It's been a journey, that sort of thing. In writing books, you don't always know what you're going to. For me personally, at least, be writing until you start writing, and then the book and the poems kind of take a life of their own, really. Yeah.
No, that's so beautiful. Oh man, what I'd give to have been there, you reading that. in that space, those people. I get it.
Yeah. It's and of course, I don't know. I had plans to get back there last year. I think I got to revisit, but I had a conflict, I think. But this year, of course, it just didn't happen. It just didn't happen. But I'm going to stay close to Ali. So I in his life, in my poetry. So so I went from that book to Our Shut Eyes, and kind of like the Ali book. Our Shut Eyes was there had been seeds planted of our shut eyes while writing the poems of spirits of the gods, and then I saw a sort of and even with Soul Be a Witness, because many of those poems are poems in which I'm dealing with this problem of race in America. And so I wanted to spend some time focusing on that in poems in another collection. And so, I went back to Spirits of the Gods, and I saw that even in Soul Be a Witness, it was kind of like, the Our Shut Eyes was already being created, but I didn't know it. I didn't know that this book would be what it would be. And there was one poem in particular in Spirits of the Gods that, again, it was an event that occurred that summer, of 2016, in which I began to think more about this journey of mine that I had been on as a Black father, as a Black man in America. And then, because in much of Spirits, in much of Soul Be a Witness, I was the focus there was on Black boys, who would become Black men, and I mean, there are a number of poems in there that deal with that. And I wish I don't know how much. I don't have a timer in front of me. I'll watch. Well, I got to watch. What time? How much more time do we have? Not all night,
Yeah, no, I think by all means, I'd love to hear another one.
Okay. But so there was this one poem in Spirits of the Gods titled "Why Being a Black Father in America Today Frightens and Angers Me," and it was taken. It's inspired by an image that Dennis Paul Williams had sent. So I'm not going to read this poem, but it was it's a poem about the Alton Sterling shooting that took place in not just the killing of Alton, but Philando Castile. You remember that summer that, and then you'd think it would have stopped there, huh? You think it would have not stopped, but I mean, you think that there would be more justice. It was 2016, but then you think about 1916. Go back 100 years. Think about Jesse Washington, that young teenage boy, who was lynched in Waco, Texas. And they said, man, so after 100 years, we have an Alton Sterling, Philando Castile, and then on and on, like 2017, 2018, 2019. When is it ever going to stop? When will there be justice? So I started thinking kind of more poetry focused, and it's on race, and it's hard to put race in that sort of creative context. I mean, it's racism in a creative context. So the next collection focuses, largely about that, and the Atlanta poems comprise, only about half the manuscript. Many of the other poems, there's even or focused on this problem that we still continue to have in America of with race, and there's even a kind of a follow-up to the why being a black father in America today, frightens and angers me. There's a follow-up on the Alton Sterling shooting that's going to be in this next collection when the police body cameras, when the content of the body cameras were actually released, and you could see, you could hear the words spoken by the police officers while this man was lying on the ground, bleeding to death. And it's so that's kind of all going to be part of I guess this next collection. So that's kind of where I am with the poetry right now. I'm waiting for Our Shut Eyes to be released. My publishers assured me that it's going to happen by the end of the year, and we're seeing some progress. By the way, I'm using another piece of art by Dennis on the cover of it. So I tell people, look, if you have no interest in the poetry and you think it's lousy, get the book for the art. Pin it on your wall, frame it, right? Any other words? I mean, I can talk all night and I can read all night. I love reading poetry, but I know we. There was one thing, Chris, that I wanted to kind of really bring into this conversation real briefly. We talked about it in an email, but when I write about, I can't write about the experience of being Black and other Black Americans, without really sort of focusing on my own past and personal past, and I've already talked about my grandfather Andre, right? Well, I've had two other men in my lives, right, who, for good or bad, have had some influence on my life and who I am today. My natural father and my stepfather, and so there's poetry in several of the collections that deal with those experiences. A Mandala of Hands and So Be a Witness. Well, actually, both those collections have poems about both those men, and my stepfather, I say raised me starting from first grade. My grandpa Andre, who was the man of my early childhood, it's the father of my early childhood. My natural father and I had no relationship whatsoever. My mother became pregnant when she was 15. They married and never lived together. I was born to a teenage mother. She was 16 when I was born. They never lived under a roof together. I do one of those what do you call it, shotgun wedding? You better bet you gotten this young girl pregnant, So I think there was a I don't know, some kind of a legal arrangement there, but he then joined the Army, and that was it. I saw very little of him. And many years later, he wrote me a letter, right? And I didn't respond to the letter. I was, at that point in time, I was, you know, I wouldn't say successful, but I was actually a state official. And bumped into him while giving a speech somewhere. So he followed up and wrote me this letter. I, you know, tucked it away in the box, and it was it, right? So in the process of writing Soul Be Witness, I received a letter from my son, Patrick, one day. I was at Cave Canem. I was on my way to Cave Canem. I was in the airport. It was Father's Day. And I got this email from my son, Patrick, and I thought it was going to be, you know, hey, Pop, happy Father's Day, da, da, da. But it turns out, you know, back then you had these little Blackberries and you're scrolling. So I'm like, God darn, man, how long is this thing? This is more than a letter. It's like a little, you know, book here, you know. So I said, I've got to figure out a way to respond to this. You know, doing the Cave Canem, I sat several times trying to, you know, begin I was going to write maybe another letter to him or write a poem to his letter, and I couldn't. So at the end of the retreat, I decided, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to write a book of poetry for him, in my response to him. But in this book, I've got to respond to John D., my father, my stepfather, whose letter I had kept for 25 years and I had never written back. So I thought that would be important, that I bring some of this to closure with him, you know. So if you don't mind, I would like to maybe conclude with two poems. One will be my reply to the letter from John D. And the second one will be a poem titled Shaving Mirror, and which is a poem dedicated to my stepfather. And it says one little small note for the audience. My stepfather and I went on a 7-year journey of his sickness, his Alzheimer's sickness, and 7 years. And it was quite a journey because I was living like two hours, you know, away from him, and eventually, you know, had to have him arrested, put in an institution, and he ended up, of course, in a nursing home. So just a little context there. So for when I read Shaving Mirror, but let me begin with reply to the letter from John D. One night, nearly 2 decades before you wrote, I drove a few miles from home and called you from a roadside payphone, needing help for my college tuition. My memory has grown kinder over the years, but in plain truth, you said no. Slowly, the sound grew faint, then silent. But the wound of your words never healed. That was the first and last time I asked anything of you. And then one day I heard that my grandmother, your mother, had died. She had always made me feel loved like one of her children. I learned of her death incidentally a week after she had been buried. It has taken me 25 years to reply to your letter. My hurt buried you long before we laid you inside those narrow, tunneled walls. There can be no reconciliation, only your loss and regret. But I forgive you. So the last poem is The Shaving Mirror. I arrived late with the intent of leaving early. You have eaten dinner, and your body knows the hour has passed for you to be strapped to a pulley, hoisted from your chair, and laid to bed until morning. But I find pleasure in holding your face in my hand. A son's indulgence to put sweetened bread within your reach like a teething toy. Then lean over your drooping torso and groom you, tugging at your stiffened neck, your fingers grabbing and pinching like claws. Your face in my hands. Once child's play, now darkened, tarnished glass, shaving your gray, stubborn stubbles. I hum a tuneless song to the bee-like drone of a norelco. I polish the roughness that pricks my palm, finding a dimly glaring image, a moment, not many years ago, when a gentle, loving man calmly rose from his chair, stood stiffly on his legs, and spoke my name. And I knew his stone-like look meant I am the father. That's to Daddy. All right.
That was so beautiful.
Thank you, man.
No, thank you. That was, wow. When you were talking to me about the poems, I was hoping you'd finish on that one, and I'm so glad.
Thank you.
Synchronicity. I think me and you could probably talk boxing, poetry, and probably drink a little rum.
Yeah.
But I think this is the wrap for Saturday of Words and Music.
Okay. What's almost 2 hours I've been rapping on. Gosh.
We've been rapping on. I want to thank you so much for talking to me throughout the week and then tonight as well. And I want to thank Megan and Candace at Words and Music.
Yeah, Words and Music, yeah. And my thank you as well, Christopher, to you for your interest in my work and for moderating this conversation, and to all the staff of Words and Music, who worked so hard to put this event, the entire, conference together. It's I know it takes a lot of work, and to have invited me. My very special thanks for allowing me to be to play a small part.
Thank you. We're so humbled you said yes to the invitation. Thank you so much. Wow. Okay, so from now on, every night of Words and Music is just going to close out with poetry, right? Because I feel like I leave these nights so full. And I'm just so happy when I go to sleep because I get to think about poetry. And tonight also Muhammad Ali, So thank you for that. So tomorrow, speaking of the greatest, we are going to pay tribute all day tomorrow to one of New Orleans' greatest, and that is Tom Dent. So I'll give you a little preview of what you can look forward to tomorrow. Tom Dent was the son of an HBCU president, Alfred Dent, who was the president of Dillard. He was also an HBCU graduate. So we're starting out the day with Carmen Wong's brainchild, which is called Affirming Voices, Howard Graduates on Black Intellectualism as Resistance. And so we have 4 Howard University graduates who are going to be talking to us about the way that they use their intellectualism to serve the community, to resist, to fight back, to empower one another, that kind of thing. Then we're moving into Tom Dent, the poet, from Tom Dent, the activist. So Sky Jackson, who we heard earlier at Heartbreak and Research, has been working with local poets for months to curate a poetry workshop inspired by Tom Dent, and especially the way that Tom Dent riffed off jazz. Following that, we are so lucky, we are so fortunate. We have the No Dream Deferred Theater Company, who is going to do a staged live reading of Ritual Murder, Tom Dent's one-act play that 50 years ago still resonates. I mean, this play, if you've never read it, if you've never seen it, feels like it could have been written yesterday, and the same issues, the same problems that Dent expresses 50 years ago are right here in New Orleans today. And then after we've talked about Tom Dent, the activist, Tom Dent, the poet, Tom Dent, the playwright, where do we go from there? We talk about Tom Dent, the man. We are so lucky. We have his brother, Benjamin Dent, and his nieces, Lindsay and Laura Dent, in conversation with Kalamu Ya Salam and Dr. Jerry Ward, who, as you guys saw, introduced Taimba Jess last night. So that's going to close out the festival, our Day of Dent, because Tom Dent's book of work, The New Orleans Griot, the Tom Dent Reader, as you all know, or I hope you know, is our One Book, One New Orleans choice this year. So Kalamu Ya Salam pulled together Tom Dent's works and created this really beautiful volume, which I won't get because I'm not sure it's in arm's reach. It's a gorgeous volume. I'll show it to you tomorrow. And as you know, also, Tom Dent was all about the arts being free and accessible and for the people, not just for folks in universities, right, who could afford to experience them. And so when we were really thinking about how to reimagine words and music this year, one of the things we did was think about what Tom Dent would have advised us to do if he were here. And he would have said, people are struggling, make it a donation-based festival. So that's what we did. So all of y'all's donations are going to support something that can be accessed by anyone for free. But we love it if you can pitch in as our community. So you can do that by clicking those links in the comments section. Even if we are not live, if you're watching this later, letting the words of John Warner Smith lull you to sleep at midnight, you can click those links. The links are live even when we are not. You can also go to PayPal and you can type in wordsandmusicnola@gmail.com. You can also go to your phone right now and text WAM20, WAM20 to 44321. And you can help support the festival and support the arts in New Orleans and support the year-round work of bringing literacy resources to our community. So don't forget that you can buy Muhammad's Mountain and all the other books you've heard about at this festival at our festival bookstore powered by Tubby and Coo's Mid-City Bookshop. The link is in the comments. You can also go to wordsandmusic.org, and it is the link on the homepage. So thank you, Stacy, for that comment. Stacy's cup panel also knocked it out of the park today. I will see you all at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning for Affirming Resistance, Howard University graduates, and Black intellectualism.